The autumn evening had brought a gentle chill to the air as Olivia Bennet made her way home from the university library. Streetlights cast long shadows across the tree-lined streets of Brookfield Heights, one of Boston's most prestigious neighborhoods. At 23, Olivia carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was headed in life. Third year of law school, top of her class, and already fielding offers from firms that her classmates would give anything to interview with. The weight of textbooks in her designer backpack reminded her of tomorrow's constitutional law exam. She had stayed at the library longer than planned, lost in case studies and precedents until the librarian's polite cough had reminded her of closing time. Now the streets were quiet, with only the occasional car passing by elegant brownstones and manicured lawns. Olivia checked her watch, 10:45 p.m. Her apartment was just 15 minutes away, and despite the late hour, she felt safe in this neighborhood. Her father, a senior partner at one of the city's most respected law firms, had insisted she live somewhere secure when she moved out of the family home in Wellesley. This area, with its low crime rate and proximity to campus, had been his top choice. The sound of a slow-moving car behind her barely registered until the flash of red and blue lights suddenly painted the sidewalk in front of her. Olivia turned, squinting slightly as a police cruiser pulled alongside her. The window rolled down, revealing Officer James Daniels, a man whose stern face showed the weathering of 15 years on the force. "Evening," he said, his voice carrying a forced politeness that immediately put Olivia on alert. "Mind if I ask what you're doing in this neighborhood at this hour?" Olivia blinked, momentarily confused by the question. "I'm walking home, officer. I live just a few blocks from here." Officer Daniels studied her with obvious skepticism. His eyes moved from her face to her expensive coat, designer backpack, and the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her for her 21st birthday. "You live here? In Brookfield Heights?" His tone made it clear what he was really asking. Olivia felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd had countless times before when someone decided she didn't belong somewhere. "Yes, on Carlton Avenue." "Is there a problem?" The officer stepped out of his car now, hand resting casually near his belt. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area, several break-ins last week. Just doing my job checking on people who might be out of place." "I'm not out of place. I've lived here for 2 years," Olivia replied, keeping her voice steady despite the rising tension. Years of her parents' careful coaching echoed in her mind. Always stay calm, always be polite, always know your rights. "ID, please," Daniels demanded, extending his hand. Olivia reached into her coat pocket for her wallet, movements deliberately slow and visible. "May I ask why I'm being stopped? I'm simply walking home." Officer Daniels's expression hardened. When an officer asks for identification, you provide it. That's how this works. She handed over her driver's license, watching as Daniels examined it with exaggerated care. The address clearly showed she lived exactly where she'd said. "This is current?" he asked, making no move to return it. "Yes, officer. As I mentioned, I live on Carlton, apartment 3B. Something in his demeanor shifted subtly. "Step over to the cruiser, please. Hands where I can see them." Olivia's heart began to pound harder, but she kept her face neutral. "Have I done something wrong, Officer Daniels?" she asked, noting his name from the badge now visible in the streetlight. "Just routine questioning about the break-ins," he said, gesturing toward his car. "The victims reported seeing a young person hanging around. Similar description." The implication hung in the air between them. Olivia felt a flash of both fear and anger but kept her expression composed. "I understand you're doing your job, but I was at the university library until it closed. The security cameras and the librarian can confirm that." "University, huh? Which one?" His tone was challenging now, as if he'd caught her in a lie. "Harvard Law. I'm in my 3rd year." Officer Daniels let out a short laugh. "Sure you are. And I'm the Attorney General." He took a step closer. "Listen, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Maybe you borrowed those fancy clothes. Maybe you stole them. Either way, you're going to tell me why you're really in this neighborhood." A car drove by slowly. the driver glancing curiously at the scene before continuing on. Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "My father is Thomas Bennett of Bennett, Wu and Associates," she said, hating that she had to invoke her father's name but recognizing the situation was escalating. "You can call him to confirm who I am. I'd like to do that now, in fact." At the mention of the well-known law firm, Daniels's eyes narrowed. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then his expression changed completely, becoming something darker, more calculating. "Hand over the backpack," he said quietly, glancing up and down the street. "And that watch looks expensive, too." Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. The backpack and the watch. Now." Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. This wasn't about suspicious activity or break-ins, this was something much worse. "Officer Daniels, I believe you're overstepping your authority. I'd like to call my father now." She reached slowly toward her pocket for her phone. "Hand it over, all of it," Daniels hissed, his hand moving to his weapon. "Or I'll arrest you for resisting and assaulting an officer. See how Harvard law likes that on your record." Olivia froze. Her mind raced through options, evaluating risks with the precision her legal training had honed. Daniels had positioned them partly in shadow, away from the nearest house. His cruiser was angled so its dashboard camera couldn't capture what was happening. With deliberate calm, Olivia pressed the side button on her smartwatch 3 times, activating the emergency function her parents had insisted she learn to use. The device would now record audio and share her location with emergency contacts. "Fine," she said, her voice surprisingly steady as she slipped her backpack off her shoulders. "Take it. There's nothing in there but law books anyway." Daniel snatched the bag, quickly rifling through it before looking back at her with growing anger. "Wallet, jewelry, phone, everything." "My wallet is in my coat pocket," she said, moving her hand slowly to retrieve it. As she did, lights came on in the house across the street. An older man appeared at the window, peering out curiously at the police car. Daniels noticed too. His demeanor shifted instantly, professional mask sliding back into place. "Actually, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said loudly enough for anyone listening to hear. "Your ID checks out. Sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am." He thrust the backpack roughly into her arms and leaned in close. "Not a word about this to anyone, or next time there won't be any witnesses around," he whispered. "Girls like you should know when they're not welcome somewhere." The threat hung in the air between them as he backed toward his cruiser. Olivia stood perfectly still, clutching her backpack, her watch still recording every word. "Have a good evening," Daniels called out with false cheerfulness as he got into his car. The older man was still watching from his window. With a final warning glare at Olivia, Daniels drove away. The moment his taillights disappeared around the corner, Olivia's composed facade cracked. Her hands trembled as she checked her watch, confirming it had recorded the entire encounter. Then, instead of continuing toward her apartment, she crossed the street to the house where the man still stood in the window. She needed witnesses. She needed safety. And most importantly, she needed to make a call that would ensure Officer James Daniels would never do this to anyone else again. As she approached the house, the porch light flicked on. The door opened, before she could even knock, revealing an elderly couple looking at her with concern. "We saw what happened," the woman said. "Are you all right, dear?" "No," Olivia answered honestly, her voice finally betraying her fear. "But I will be. Could I please use your phone? I need to call my father. And then the police station." The couple exchanged a knowing look before ushering her inside to safety. What Olivia didn't know then was that this night would change everything, not just for her but for an entire system that had protected men like James Daniels for far too long. Her call would set in motion events that would ultimately lead to justice, but the path there would be neither quick nor easy. Inside the warm living room of Harold and Mabel Thompson's home, Olivia sat with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that she couldn't bring herself to drink. The elderly couple had welcomed her with a kindness that stood in stark contrast to what she'd just experienced on the street outside. "I've been a resident here for over 40 years, Harold said, his voice carrying the gentle rasp of age. "Never thought I'd see something like that from one of our own officers." Mabel nodded in agreement as she sat beside Olivia on the floral-patterned sofa. "We saw him stop you from our window. Something didn't seem right about it from the beginning." Olivia's finger hovered over her father's contact information on the Thompsons' landline phone. Part of her, the part that had been taught all her life to handle things independently, hesitated. Another part, the law student who understood exactly what had just happened, knew this was bigger than her. "I need to make 2 calls," she said finally. "One to my father and one to the police station, but not the local precinct." She looked up at the Thompsons. "Officer Daniels works there. I need to call the next district over or the state police." Harold's eyes widened slightly in understanding. "You're saying he actually tried to rob you? While in uniform?" Olivia nodded, the reality of it still sinking in. "And threatened me when he saw you watching from the window." "You call whoever you need to, dear," Mabel said, "and we'll back up whatever you tell them. We may be old, but our eyes and ears work just fine." With a deep breath, Olivia dialed her father's number. Thomas Bennett answered on the 3rd ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Dad, I need your help," Olivia said, the professional calm she'd maintained during the confrontation finally cracking. "Something happened. A police officer stopped me walking home from the library and tried to take my things." Her father was instantly alert. "Are you hurt? Where are you now?" "I'm safe. I'm at a neighbor's house." She glanced at Harold, who nodded encouragingly. "Dad, he threatened me when someone spotted us. Said next time there wouldn't be any witnesses." There was silence on the line for a moment. When Thomas spoke again, his voice had the controlled precision that had made him one of Boston's most feared litigators. "I'm on my way. Don't call anyone else until I get there." "Dad, I have it all recorded. My watch—" "Don't say another word over the phone," he cut in. "Just text me the address where you are. I'll be there in 20 minutes. After ending the call, Olivia sent her father the Thompsons' address, then sat back, feeling suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the encounter was fading, leaving behind a cold clarity about what had just happened, and what might have happened if Harold hadn't looked out his window when he did. "Your father coming?" Harold asked. "Yes. He'll be here soon." Olivia touched her watch. "I need to save this recording properly." She carefully went through the steps to ensure the audio file was secured and backed up to her cloud account. Mabel returned from the kitchen with a plate of cookies that no one would eat. "Should we call 911? Report what happened?" Olivia shook her head. "My father wants to handle it. He knows how these things work." The unspoken reality hung in the air that reporting a police officer required careful navigation of systems designed to protect their own. "Well, we're witnesses," Harold said firmly. "We'll tell anyone who asks exactly what we saw." The minutes ticked by slowly. Olivia found herself repeatedly checking that her watch had indeed captured the entire interaction. Each time she verified, the file was there. A small wave of relief washed over her, followed immediately by renewed tension about what was to come. When the doorbell finally rang, Mabel went to answer it. Thomas Bennett stood on the porch, still wearing the suit pants and dress shirt he'd had on when he went to bed, a coat hastily thrown over them. His face, usually composed into a professional mask, showed every one of his 57 years as he caught sight of his daughter. Olivia. It was just her name, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of worry. She stood, feeling suddenly like a child again despite her law school training and adult independence. "Dad?" Thomas crossed the room in 3 quick strides and wrapped her in a hug that was so uncharacteristically demonstrative that Olivia felt tears threatening for the first time that night. "Tell me everything," he said after introducing himself to the Thompsons. From the beginning, Olivia recounted the events in precise detail, her legal training evident in how she stuck to facts, times, and exact quotes. Her father's expression darkened with each word, but he remained silent until she finished. "And you recorded this?" he asked. In response, Olivia pulled up the file on her watch and played it. The audio was surprisingly clear, capturing Daniel's initial questioning. his skepticism about her living in the neighborhood, and most damningly, his demand for her backpack and watch, followed by his threat when he spotted Harold at the window. When it ended, Thomas took a slow, controlled breath. "Harold, Mabel, I can't thank you enough for taking my daughter in. I'm going to need to ask another favor. Would you be willing to write down what you witnessed tonight? It would be extremely helpful." "Of course," Harold said without hesitation. "That officer has no business wearing a badge." Thomas nodded, then turned to Olivia. "We're not calling the local precinct. We're going straight to the state police and the district attorney's office." He checked his watch. "It's almost midnight. We'll go to the state police barracks now. They're open 24 hours. And to the DA first thing in the morning." "What about my apartment?" Olivia asked suddenly. "He saw my address on my license. What if he comes there?" A flash of something dangerous crossed Thomas's face. "You're staying at our house tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps, but you're not going back to your apartment alone." As they prepared to leave, Mabel pressed a piece of paper with their phone number into Olivia's hand. "Call us anytime, dear. We want to know how this turns out." The drive to the state police barracks was mostly silent. Olivia watched the familiar neighborhoods of Boston slide past her window, looking somehow different now. It wasn't until they were nearly there that her father spoke. "This isn't going to be easy," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "There's a brotherhood among police. Even the good ones protect their own." "I know, Dad. But that recording changes everything. Without it, this would be your word against his." He glanced at her. "I'm proud of you for keeping your head, for remembering your watch." The state police barracks was a plain, functional building with bright fluorescent lighting that seemed harsh after the dim streets. Inside, Thomas asked to speak to the highest-ranking officer on duty, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request that could be denied. 20 minutes later, they sat across from Captain Lisa Rodriguez, a veteran officer with a reputation for rigorous adherence to proper procedure. Thomas had insisted on her specifically, knowing her by reputation from previous cases. "Mr. Bennett, Ms. Bennett," Captain Rodriguez began, "I understand this is a serious allegation against a police officer. I need to hear exactly what happened." Once again, Olivia recounted the events of the night. This time, she was aware of Captain Rodriguez watching her closely, assessing not just her words but her demeanor. When she finished, Thomas placed a small data drive on the table. "The entire interaction was recorded on my daughter's watch," he said. "We've made a copy for you. The original is secured in multiple locations." Rodriguez's eyebrows rose slightly as she connected the drive to her computer. For the next 5 minutes, the office was silent except for the audio playing from Olivia's watch. When it ended, Rodriguez leaned back in her chair, her face unreadable. "Ms. Bennett, I'll need you to make a formal statement. After that, I'm going to personally contact Internal Affairs in the District Attorney's office." Her voice was measured, professional. "This recording constitutes evidence of attempted armed robbery and intimidation by a police officer in uniform. We take that extremely seriously." "And Officer Daniels?" Thomas asked. "He made a direct threat against my daughter." "He'll be brought in for questioning immediately," Rodriguez assured them. "Given the evidence, I expect he'll be suspended without pay pending a full investigation, and I'll arrange for patrols near your residence for the next several days." As Olivia signed her statement an hour later, she felt a strange mix of exhaustion and alertness. What had begun as a routine walk home had turned into something that would likely change the course of her life, and perhaps the lives of others who had encountered Officer Daniels before her. "This is just the beginning," her father said quietly as they finally left the barracks in the early hours of the morning. "But you've done everything right so far. Now we make sure he never puts on that uniform again." Olivia nodded, looking out at the first hints of dawn breaking over Boston. She thought about the recording on her watch, how such a small device had captured words that might finally bring accountability, where it had been missing for too long. Morning light filtered through the guest room blinds as Olivia woke in, her childhood home. For a moment, the familiar surroundings confused her, until the events of the previous night came rushing back. She reached instinctively for her watch, checking that the recording was still there, still safe. Downstairs, she found her mother, Patricia Bennett, preparing breakfast with the precise efficiency that had made her one of Boston's top hospital administrators. Her father sat at the kitchen island, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in the quiet, intense tone he reserved for his most important cases. "Morning, sweetheart," Patricia said, her calm voice belying the worry in her eyes. She set a cup of coffee in front of Olivia. "Your father's been on the phone since 6 a.m. Thomas ended his call and looked up. "That was District Attorney Rivera. He's meeting us at his office at 10. Olivia nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "That's good, right? That he's seeing us personally?" "Very good," her father confirmed. "Michael and I go back 20 years. He doesn't take police misconduct lightly." Patricia joined them at the island. "I've already called the university. You're excused from classes today." When Olivia began to protest, Patricia raised a hand. "This takes priority, Olivia. Your constitutional law exam can wait." The Bennett family had always approached crises methodically, and this morning was no exception. While Olivia showered and changed into clothes her mother had picked up from her apartment, Thomas coordinated with his law firm to clear his schedule and briefed his most trusted colleague on the situation. By 9:30, they were driving downtown to the district attorney's office, a route Thomas had taken countless times over his career, but never with his daughter as a victim. "The recording is compelling," he said as they navigated morning traffic. "But the DA will want to know if there's more. Has this officer ever interacted with you before? Have you noticed him patrolling near your apartment?" Olivia shook her head. "Never. I didn't recognize him at all." "What about friends? Anyone you know who might have had similar experiences?" This question gave Olivia pause. "I don't know. But Zoe mentioned something last semester about being stopped near campus for looking suspicious. She was just walking to the library." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "We should talk to her. If this officer has a pattern of behavior, that strengthens the case considerably." The district attorney's office occupied several floors of a government building downtown. Unlike the lavish, private firms Thomas typically worked in, the space was functional rather than impressive, the domain of overworked public servants rather than corporate lawyers. District Attorney Michael Rivera met them personally, ushering them into his office rather than a conference room, a sign of the seriousness with which he was taking the matter. "Thomas, Ms. Bennett," he greeted them, gesturing to chairs across from his desk. "I've already reviewed the recording. Captain Rodriguez sent over this morning. Before we begin, I want you to know we're treating this with the utmost seriousness." "Thank you, Michael," Thomas said. "This is my daughter, Olivia." Rivera nodded to her. "Ms. Bennett, I'm sorry about what happened to you. Can you walk me through the events one more time, in your own words?" Once again, Olivia recounted her experience, now with the practiced precision of someone who had already told the story several times. Rivera listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. "Officer Daniels was brought in for questioning at 2 a.m., Rivera said when she finished. "He's claiming it was a routine stop and that you misinterpreted his actions." Thomas scoffed. "The recording makes his intentions perfectly clear." "I agree," Rivera said. "His body camera was conveniently turned off during the encounter. That alone raises red flags. We've already obtained a warrant to search his home, vehicle, and personal locker at the station." "What charges are you considering?" Thomas asked. "Attempted armed robbery for starters, abuse of power, civil rights violations, possibly hate crime enhancements, depending on what else we find." Rivera leaned forward. "Ms. Bennett, did Officer Daniels say or do anything specifically regarding your race?" Olivia considered the question carefully. "He questioned whether I belonged in the neighborhood, said people like me should know when they're not welcome somewhere. His tone made it clear what he meant." Rivera nodded. "We'll add that to the record. Now, there's something else you should know." He pulled a file from his desk. "After Captain Rodriguez filed her report last night, Internal Affairs did an immediate review of complaint records against Officer Daniels." He opened the folder and turned it so they could see. "In the past 5 years, there have been 7 formal complaints filed against him. 3 for excessive force, 4 for harassment or discriminatory behavior. All were dismissed for lack of evidence or insufficient grounds. Thomas's expression darkened. 7 complaints and he was still on patrol? Unfortunately, yes. And all 7 complainants were people of color. Rivera's jaw tightened. This is exactly the pattern of behavior that undermines public trust in law enforcement. What happens now? Olivia asked. We're building the case, Rivera explained. Officer Daniels is currently in custody. His bail hearing is this afternoon. Given the severity of the charges and the evidence we have, I'll be requesting he be held without bail as a danger to the community. He turned to Thomas. I'd like to speak with the Thompsons today if possible. Their witness statement would strengthen our case considerably. They've already agreed to help in any way they can, Thomas assured him. As they were preparing to leave, Rivera's assistant knocked and entered with a tablet. Sir, you need to see this. It just came in from the search team at Daniel's residence. Rivera read the screen, his expression growing increasingly grim. He looked up at Thomas and Olivia. They found a box in his bedroom closet. Jewelry, wallets, electronics, items that don't match his income or spending habits. They're running serial numbers now, but it appears your daughter isn't the first person he's robbed. The implication settled heavily in the room. What had happened to Olivia wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. It was part of a pattern, a systematic abuse of power that had gone unchecked for years. Outside the DA's office, Olivia stood on the steps of the building, watching people pass by on the street below. Ordinary citizens going about their day, unaware of the corruption that had been hiding behind a badge just blocks away. What are you thinking? Her father asked. Quietly, I'm thinking about the 7 complaints that were dismissed, she said. About the people who tried to speak up and weren't believed. Thomas nodded slowly. The system protected him. It happens more often than people realize. I want to talk to them, Olivia decided, if they're willing, if my case can help theirs in any way. Before Thomas could respond, his phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, then looked at Olivia with surprise. It's Captain Rodriguez. She wants to meet with us again. There's been a development. An hour later, they sat in Captain Rodriguez's office at the state police barracks. The captain's normally composed expression showed signs of strain. After Officer Daniels was brought in, we seized his personal phone. She began without preamble. Our tech team has been going through it this morning. They found text messages between Daniels and 2 other officers from his precinct. She turned her computer monitor so they could see. These messages date back nearly 3 years. They discuss targeting outsiders in wealthy neighborhoods, specifically referring to minority residents or visitors. They have a system for identifying potential targets and even discuss how to ensure no witnesses. Olivia felt a chill despite the warm office. So it wasn't just him? No, Rodriguez confirmed. It appears to be an organized operation involving at least 3 officers. We're bringing in the other 2 for questioning now. Thomas leaned forward. Has this gone to internal affairs yet? Yes, and directly to the police commissioner as well. This goes beyond a single corrupt officer, Mr. Bennett. This suggests a structural problem within that precinct. Olivia thought about the recording on her watch. How close she had come to being just another dismissed complaint. Another victim without proof. The thought made her stomach tighten. There's more, Rodriguez continued. We found messages, referencing a sergeant who helped manage complaints, essentially ensuring they never made it past preliminary review. The investigation is expanding hour by hour. As they left the barracks for the second time in less than 24 hours, Olivia felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at the system that had allowed this to happen, relief that evidence was mounting, and a growing resolve to see this through to the end. The bail hearing is at 3, her father reminded her as they reached the car. You don't have to attend. Olivia looked at him, her decision already made. Yes, I do. I want to be there. I want him to see me. Thomas studied his daughter's face for a moment, then nodded. Then we'll be there together. What had begun as a terrifying encounter on a quiet street was rapidly becoming something much larger, a case that might finally force a reckoning with abuses of power that had been ignored for far too long. The courthouse stood tall against the afternoon sky, its stone facade a reminder of the permanence of the justice system, for better or worse. Olivia sat beside her father in the third row of the courtroom, her back straight, her expression composed despite the nervous energy coursing through her. "Remember," Thomas whispered, "bail hearings are usually quick. Don't expect lengthy proceedings." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the door through which Officer Daniels would soon enter. The courtroom was surprisingly crowded. News of the case had spread quickly. A police officer accused of attempted robbery was unusual enough to draw attention, even before the racial elements became public. A door opened and several reporters slipped into the back row. Olivia recognized a woman from the local news station, notebook already in hand. Her father had warned her that the press would be interested, but she hadn't expected this level of attention so quickly. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Eleanor Washington entered the courtroom. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for strict adherence to procedure, took her seat and surveyed the room. "Be seated," she instructed, her voice carrying authority without needing to be raised. "We're here for the bail hearing of James Daniels. Bring in the defendant." Officer Daniels entered through a side door, escorted by court officers. Gone was the confident authority he'd projected on the street. In its place was a man in an orange jumpsuit, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting around the courtroom until District Attorney Rivera approached the bench. "Your Honor, the Commonwealth is requesting that the defendant be held without bail. He poses a significant flight risk and, more importantly, a danger to the community." Judge Washington looked at the defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who appeared to have received the case file moments before entering the courtroom. "Mr. Chen, Your Honor, my client has been a police officer for 15 years with no prior criminal record. He has strong ties to the community and is not a flight risk. We request reasonable bail." Rivera was ready with his response. "Judge Washington, while the defendant has no prior convictions, evidence collected in the past 24 hours indicates this was not an isolated incident. A search of his residence uncovered multiple items believed to be stolen. Additionally, phone records suggest an ongoing pattern of similar behavior involving other officers currently under investigation." The judge studied the paperwork before her. "I've reviewed the evidence, including the audio recording of the incident in question. Mr. Chen, this recording clearly captures your client threatening Ms. Bennett and attempting to take her belongings while using his position as a police officer." Chen shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, my client maintains that the recording has been taken out of context." "Out of context?" Rivera countered. "The defendant is clearly heard demanding Ms. Bennett's backpack, watch, and other belongings, while threatening to falsely arrest her if she didn't comply. When a witness appeared, he threatened her again, stating, and I quote, 'Next time there won't be any witnesses around.'" Judge Washington's expression remained neutral, but her tone sharpened. "I've heard the recording, Mr. Chen. The context seems quite clear." She turned to review more documents. "I'm also seeing reports of 7 previous complaints against your client that were dismissed without proper investigation. And most concerning, text messages between your client and other officers discussing targeting minorities in affluent neighborhoods." Olivia watched Daniels as the judge spoke. His face remained impassive, but she could see tension in his jaw, in the way his hands gripped the edge of the table. After hearing additional arguments from both sides, Judge Washington rendered her decision. "Based on the evidence presented, particularly the recorded threats and the discovery of potentially stolen items in the defendant's possession, I find that the defendant poses a significant danger to the community. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody until trial." The gavel struck with finality. As Daniels was led away, he turned once more toward Olivia, his expression unreadable but somehow more threatening than any words could have been. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions about the case that had already been dubbed Badge and Rob by one of the local papers. Thomas expertly guided Olivia through the crowd without comment, promising a statement at a later date. They were almost to the car when a woman approached them, not with a microphone or camera, but with hesitance in her step. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "Are you the ones who reported Officer Daniels?" Thomas stepped slightly in front of Olivia. "Who's asking?" The woman looked around nervously. "My name is Veronica Taylor. He stopped me last year in Brookline. Took my jewelry, said he'd arrest me for drug possession if I reported it." Her voice trembled. "No one believed me." Olivia moved forward. "We believe you." Over the next week, 6 more people came forward with similar stories. Some had filed complaints that went nowhere. Others had been too afraid to report what happened. All described the same pattern: being stopped while in affluent neighborhoods, accused of not belonging there, and ultimately robbed by an officer who knew the system would protect him. District Attorney Rivera called a meeting with Olivia, Thomas, and Captain Rodriguez. The DA's office had been transformed into a command center of sorts, with case files and evidence boards filling the conference room. "The investigation has expanded significantly," Rivera explained. "We've identified at least 15 victims over the past 3 years, and the text messages on Daniel's phone have implicated 4 other officers, not just the 2 we initially suspected." Captain Rodriguez picked up where he left off. "We've also identified the sergeant who was burying complaints, Robert Wilson. He's been brought in for questioning and suspended pending investigation." "What about the items found in Daniel's home?" Thomas asked. "We've matched several pieces of jewelry and electronics to robbery reports," Rodriguez confirmed. "Victims are identifying their property now. It's damning evidence." Rivera leaned forward. "But here's where it gets complicated. We've discovered that Wilson wasn't acting alone in suppressing these complaints. There appears to have been knowledge at higher levels, possibly reaching the precinct captain." The implications hung heavy in the air. This was no longer about one corrupt officer or even a small ring of them. This was about systemic failure that allowed abuse to continue unchecked for years. Olivia thought about Veronica Taylor and the others who had come forward. What happens to their cases now? The people who were robbed before me? "We're reopening every complaint," Rivera assured her. "And for those who were too afraid to file reports initially, we're taking statements now. This is becoming one of the largest police corruption cases this city has seen in decades." 2 days later, Police Commissioner Lawrence called a press conference. Standing before a wall of cameras, his usual confidence noticeably diminished. He announced the suspension of 7 officers pending criminal investigation, the resignation of a precinct captain, and a department-wide review of complaint procedures. "The breach of public trust that has occurred is inexcusable," he stated, looking directly into the cameras. "The actions of these officers do not represent the values of our police force, and they will be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law." What the commissioner didn't mention, but what became clear in the following days, was that the investigation had uncovered a culture of silence that extended far beyond the officers directly involved. Those who had witnessed misconduct but said nothing. Those who had heard rumors but looked the other way. Those who had suspected but chose not to ask questions. Olivia returned to her classes the following Monday, attempting to regain some normalcy despite becoming recognizable across campus. Her constitutional law professor nodded to her as she took her seat, a silent acknowledgement of how theory and practice had collided in her life. After class, her friend Zoe caught up with her in the hallway. "Hey, I saw the news. That was the same officer who stopped me last semester, wasn't it?" "Probably," Olivia confirmed. "Have you given a statement yet?" Zoe shook her head. "I didn't think it mattered. He just questioned me for a while and let me go. He didn't take anything." "It matters," Olivia said firmly. "Every interaction helps establish the pattern, even the ones where nothing was stolen." That evening, Olivia sat in her parents' living room, where she was still staying until the investigation concluded. A stack of case files, copies provided by Rivera's office, covered the coffee table. She had been reviewing victim statements, looking for commonalities, patterns that might strengthen the case. Her father entered, 2 cups of tea in hand. "You know you don't have to do this. The DA has a whole team working on it." Olivia accepted the tea gratefully. "I know. But these people deserve to have someone looking out specifically for them. Someone who understands what they went through." She tapped a file. Did you know 3 of the victims were law students? Just like me. Thomas sat beside her. You're thinking of specializing in civil rights law, aren't you? She nodded slowly. I think I found my calling. Just not in the way I expected. Outside, rain began to fall, gentle at first, then building to a steady rhythm against the windows. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week, the first real test of the evidence they had gathered. It would be months before the case went to trial, but the groundwork being laid now would determine whether justice would finally come for all those who had been silenced for too long. 6 months passed like a blur of depositions, evidence reviews, and court appearances. What had begun as a terrifying encounter on a dark street had evolved into one of the most significant police corruption cases in the city's history. Today marked the beginning of the end, the start of James Daniels' trial. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras, a sea of microphones and notepads waiting to capture any comment from those involved. Olivia and her father navigated through them silently, having learned months ago that no comment was often the most powerful statement they could make. Inside, the courtroom was equally packed. Every bench was filled with observers, law students, community activists, and, most importantly, the other victims who had come forward after Olivia. 18 people in total, ranging in age from 19 to 62, all with similar stories of being stopped, questioned about belonging in certain neighborhoods, and ultimately robbed by officers who thought they would never be held accountable. You ready for this? Thomas asked quietly as they took their seats in the front row. Olivia nodded. After months of preparation with the prosecution team, she felt as ready as she could be. The nervous law student who had once walked home alone from the library had been replaced by someone more confident. The state versus James Daniels, called the bailiff as Judge Washington entered. The trial began with opening statements. District Attorney Rivera stood before the jury, 12 citizens who had been carefully selected over a week of questioning to ensure they could be impartial despite the high-profile nature of the case. This is not simply about a police officer who committed robbery, Rivera began, his voice carrying throughout the silent courtroom. This is about a fundamental breach of public trust. Officer Daniels swore an oath to protect and serve. Instead, he used his badge and his authority to target, intimidate, and steal from citizens based on the color of their skin. The defense attorney, no longer the court-appointed lawyer from the bail hearing but a high-priced attorney hired by the police union, countered with claims that Daniels was being scapegoated for larger departmental issues, that the evidence had been misinterpreted, that his client had been a dedicated officer for 15 years. Olivia would be the first witness called. As she approached the stand and swore to tell the truth, she looked directly at Daniels for the first time in months. He sat beside his attorney in a suit that was clearly new, his posture rigid, his expression carefully neutral. But when their eyes met briefly, she saw the same contempt she had recognized on that autumn night. Ms. Bennett, Rivera began, please, tell the court what happened on the evening of October 15th. For what felt like the 100th time, Olivia recounted the events. The initial stop, the questioning about whether she belonged in the neighborhood, the demand for her backpack and other belongings, the threat when a witness appeared. The details had not faded with time. If anything, they had become more sharply defined with each retelling. And did you record this interaction? Rivera asked. Yes. My watch has an emergency recording function. I activated it when I realized what was happening. Your Honor, we'd like to play this recording for the jury, Rivera requested. As the audio filled the courtroom, Olivia watched the jurors' faces. She saw their expressions shift from neutral to concerned, then to outright shock as they heard Daniels demand her belongings and later threaten her. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive but ultimately ineffective. He questioned why Olivia had been walking alone at night, suggested she had misinterpreted Daniels' actions, and even implied the recording might have been edited, a claim quickly dismantled by expert testimony from a forensic audio analyst. Over the next 3 weeks, witness after witness took the stand. The Thompsons described what they had seen from their window. Captain Rodriguez detailed the investigation that had uncovered a pattern of similar incidents. The other victims shared their own experiences. many fighting back tears as they finally had the opportunity to be heard and believed. Perhaps most damaging to the defense was the testimony of Officer Alex Chen, one of the junior officers implicated in the text messages, who had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Was a system, Chen admitted, avoiding eye contact with Daniels. We called it phishing, finding people who looked like they didn't belong in certain neighborhoods, especially after dark. Daniels taught me which ones to stop, how to make it look like a legitimate interaction, how to make sure there were no witnesses. And how did you choose who to target? Rivera asked. Chen's response was damning. People of color in wealthy areas. Daniels said they were less likely to be believed if they reported anything. The defense tried to paint Chen as a liar trying to save himself, but the text messages between the officers projected on a screen for the jury to see spoke for themselves. Crude jokes about fishing expeditions, discussions of specific targets, and most incriminating, messages about which complaints had been successfully buried by Sergeant Wilson. By the time the prosecution rested its case, the evidence against Daniels seemed overwhelming. The defense called character witnesses, fellow officers who spoke of Daniels' dedication to the job, but their impact was minimal compared to the mountain of evidence and testimony against him. Daniels himself took the stand on the final day, against the advice of his attorney. His testimony was a study in contradiction, claiming he had been conducting legitimate stops while simultaneously denying specific incidents, insisting he had been misunderstood while unable to explain the recorded threats, asserting his dedication to the community while the text messages clearly showed his contempt for certain residents. As closing arguments concluded and the jury filed out to begin deliberations, Olivia found herself unexpectedly calm. Whatever the verdict, she had done everything possible to ensure that the truth was heard. The jury returned after just 4 hours, remarkably quick for such a complex case. On the charge of attempted armed robbery, how do you find? Judge, Washington asked the jury forewoman, we find the defendant guilty, Your Honor. On the charge of abuse of power under color of law? Guilty, Your Honor. One by one, the verdicts were read. Guilty on all counts, including civil rights violations with hate crime enhancements. 2 weeks later, they gathered again for sentencing. Olivia sat with the other victims, many of whom had become friends, through this shared ordeal. They had supported each other through depositions and testimony, through threatening letters from police supporters, and sometimes even from family members who didn't understand why they wouldn't let it go. Judge Washington's expression was solemn as she prepared to announce her decision. She had allowed impact statements from each victim, listening intently as they described how their encounters with Daniels and the other officers had affected their sense of security, their trust in institutions, their belief in justice. Mr. Daniels, she began, you were entrusted with extraordinary power, the authority to detain, to question, to use force when necessary. That trust is sacred in our society. Your abuse of that trust is not merely a crime against these individual victims, but against the very concept of justice you swore to uphold. The courtroom was utterly silent as she continued. Beyond the robbery itself, your actions have damaged public trust in law enforcement. You have made it harder for every honest officer to do their job. You have made communities fear those who should be protecting them. Judge Washington reviewed each count, the evidence presented, and the jury's findings. Finally, she delivered her sentence. For the crimes of which you have been convicted, I sentence you to 28 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. A collective gasp moved through the courtroom. The sentence was far heavier than most had expected, a clear message about the severity with which the court viewed these offenses. Outside, rain fell gently as Olivia stood under the shelter of the courthouse portico with her parents. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but she barely noticed them. Her attention was on the group gathered nearby, the other victims now joined by family members and supporters. Veronica Taylor approached, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you, she said simply. If you hadn't recorded him that night, if you hadn't pushed for this investigation, none of this would have happened. He'd still be out there. Olivia shook her head. It wasn't just me. It was all of us together. As they stood there in the rain, the news was already spreading throughout the city and beyond. 4 other officers had been convicted in separate trials. Sergeant Wilson had pleaded guilty in exchange for testimony against higher-ranking officials. The police commissioner had resigned. Most importantly, a new civilian oversight board had been established with real power to investigate complaints against officers. Change was happening, not as quickly as many hoped, but more substantially than most had believed possible 6 months ago. That evening, Olivia returned to her apartment for the first time since the night of the incident. She had moved back weeks ago, refusing to be driven from her home, but tonight felt different somehow. Final. She stood at the window, looking out at the street where everything had begun. The same streetlights, the same sidewalk, but everything else transformed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Just saw the news, justice served, proud of you." Olivia smiled and set the phone down. Tomorrow she would return to her classes, to the constitutional law textbooks that now felt less like academic theory and more like living, breathing reality. The path ahead was clearer than ever, using the law to ensure that what had happened, to her, to Veronica, to all the others, would happen less often in the future. It wasn't a perfect ending. No verdict or sentence could erase what had happened or heal all the damage done. But it was a beginning of accountability, of change, of a justice system that might someday work the way it was always meant to. And for tonight, that was enough.